about
Sorry.
that's okay. But what you'll get from Catherine and I that's often lacking in other forums is both professional and personal experience. As Catherine and I have had extensive experience working through our own childhood traumas, and we both have children who have experienced traumatic events. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat, and we're going to get to as many as we possibly can at the end. And if you don't mind taking a moment to put in the chat your first name and where you're zooming in from and what your role is with your child, either mom, dad, grandparent, foster parent, clinician, we would love to know who you all are and where you're all coming from. And before we get rolling, just a couple of guidelines. This topic can be emotionally evocative for some people. There are many people who are suffering through some issues. Please take care of yourself, practice intentional self-care, take a break, leave if you need to. This will be recorded and we will be posting it. We are here to offer information and resources, not therapy. So though Catherine is a certified therapist, the purpose of the webinar is solely informational. And this is Trauma Informed Parents Launch. It's our first webinar, so please forgive any technical snafus or dogs barking, and please practice kindness with each other. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Susie. And I think somebody said in the chat, our first comment was, can we see your dog?
That's great.
So welcome, everyone. I'm just going to take a moment here and share my screen with you so that we can get the webinar up and rolling. Pop it on. And can you all see that? Can you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down? We got some thumbs up going on. That's wonderful. Oh, wait, I don't want to see that. I want to see this. Why won't that show me that? Come on. So you guys now see my Zoom meeting, right? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Why isn't that popping up? We don't want that. Oh, okay. Here's our first technical issue. Let's stop that share and start again. Okay. So what are we seeing now? My Zoom meeting still?
Yeah, caring for emotionally dysregulated.
Okay, there it is.
There it is. Yep.
Well, you know what's cool about doing these is that something always goes wrong when you do a live webinar with actual people. So hopefully that was it, and we're good to go for the rest of our time together. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Susie for not only being my friend, but coming up with the idea for this partnership. I think it's a great opportunity for us to share with you not only our professional and practice wisdom, but also our personal stories. It's a time for us to kind of come together. I'm looking forward to all of your questions, and we will just take time to be in each other's space and to be able to hold a place of healing for all of us and for our children and the young people that we're caring for. So I think that this is, my hope is that this is going to be a really productive time. Um, you know, you one of the things that happens when you have experienced a traumatic event yourself, or you have a child that's experienced trauma, is that you become part of a larger group of people who share these kind of not so uncommon experiences anymore. It's often difficult to find the help that you need. It's often difficult to find other people who really understand what you're going through as a caregiver. So one of the reasons that we thought about doing this piece tonight was really to kind of bring us all together, or as many people as possible together, to learn from each other. And to have the opportunity to have a common space to be in. So that's what one of our hopes tonight. The other hope that your takeaway tonight is the importance of you in the equation. We can't stress enough. I can't stress enough the importance of caring adults in the life of a young person who is experiencing emotional dysregulation, or who has experienced a traumatic event. The power that we have to help with the healing process, or not be so helpful with the healing process, is just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's incredibly powerful. And it is integral to their healing and to our own growth and development as individuals, as moms and dads and parents. So I'm really excited about really getting to be here tonight. This is kind of what we're going to go over. I will tell you that the slides and the content don't match up exactly. We're going to be talking about all of these topics, but in each topic, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, give you examples, and hopefully you find connection and pieces of information that you can take away tonight that you can use tomorrow morning. Because that again is really why we're here. So we noticed that we're going to be looking first at our children, and the young people that we're caring for, and how emotional dysregulation can present. We're looking at some commonality of experience. We'll be looking at your role as their adult caregiver or their aunt or their uncle, and how that impacts them, and how you can promote healing for them and help them to learn the skills that they need for self-reflection and emotional re-regulation. And then we're also going to spend some time tonight looking at you all, right? Looking at us. How do we cope? How do we manage? How do we um, thrive ourselves when we are in the midst of this phase of life? When we're dealing with these types of stressors that are, that don't go away, that have unpredictability, how do we take care of ourselves? And one of the things that Susie and I have been talking about is that there will be a part 2 to this webinar series that will focus more on that. And as we get to the end of the training, Susie will talk to you more about that. And at the end, we'll obviously be talking about support and resources. The resources that we've listed are all national at the moment because we don't know where everybody is, right? You guys are coming from all over the country to be with us tonight. So again, I thank you.
And out of the country.
Yeah, and out of the country, right? Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of information here. I just need to flip my people here. So, that's much better. So now I can see the whole slide. So when we're talking about mental health challenges, when we're talking about emotional dysregulation as a symptom of a larger mental health challenge in a young person, we're always thinking about that kind of along a continuum. I can't see all your faces, but I bet if I asked you, hey, give me a thumbs up if you've ever been anxious, we're going to get a lot of thumbs raised. We're going to get a lot of hands going up. Have you ever experienced depression? Same thing. Right now, while we have all experienced those things, because it's a common part of the human experience, it falls along a continuum. Not everybody that experiences anxiety needs to go for therapy or needs to get medication to help redistribute or re-regulate their neurotransmitters. The same thing is true with the symptom of emotional dysregulation. It's going to look different depending upon the developmental stage of your child, their what they've been through, what their not only their biological makeup is, but what their family system looks like. So I know, I have 2 children, and one of my daughters had some pretty significant emotional dysregulation issues after a traumatic event. And dealing with that and dealing with my other daughter are completely different. So they come from the same house, same parents, same everything, but 2 very different experiences. So I give that to you as a point of mindfulness for yourself, that it is going to look different across the different members of your family. And certainly emotional dysregulation is not just focused on children. That if we don't learn how to re-regulate our emotions as a young person, then it carries with us into adulthood. And we can see adults that have a lot of difficulty regulating their feelings. Certainly traumatic events can have a long-term impact on how we regulate emotions across our lifespan. But mental health challenges like trauma, like depression, like anxiety are very, very common in the United States and around the world. The statistic of 1 in 5 comes out directly out of mental health first aid, and we'll talk about that a little bit because that's a training program that's really accessible to people, and I think would be helpful if you're interested in taking it. But 1 in 5 of us will experience a mental health challenge that's diagnosable in any given year. So think about it. You look around the room, look around where you are in our Zoom room here. And, there are some of us who will experience a mental health challenge this year and in fact, may need treatment, may need medications to help them recover, or groups or other support services. So it's important to understand that, you know, this is not, it's not other, it's us, right? It's us, it's all of us. Um, I got all that. So looking a little bit at youth and mental health issues just for a brief moment. Trauma, anxiety disorders are all on the rise for young people these days. Especially since COVID, the data is still coming in, but we're seeing an increase in diagnosable anxiety disorders in young people. We're seeing an increase in PTSD diagnosis in young people. So when I talk about young people, we're talking from approximately age 10 up until age 18 is kind of the general grouping. Um, and what we know from research and from literature and from practice wisdom and from experience is that you guys matter. We matter as parents of these young people, as their teachers, as their coaches, as depends on your role, right? Whatever your role is, you can make a difference in the life of a young person who struggles in this way. So again, one of those takeaways that we want tonight is understand what your role is and understand that you have the ability, in maybe making a few simple changes in your own life or doing some research to make a difference, a meaningful difference in the life of a young person. I'll go back and give you an example, a very quick example of that. My second grade teacher, right? My second grade teacher, I still remember her name. She was my person. In the midst of things that were going on in my own life, in the midst of things that I didn't understand, there was an adult in my life who was regulated, who was calm, who cared about me with appropriate boundaries, and who was able to be there and just show up for me when other adults in my life couldn't. So that's just one small example of how that person, who I now remember, I'm 56 years old, and I still remember Miss Buck's name. And she's still an important person in my life, even though I haven't seen her in many, many years. All right, so let's look a little bit here at emotional dysregulation in general, so that we are understanding kind of where we are. When we think about emotional dysregulation, and sorry, we got an admission here. When we think about emotional dysregulation overall, we're looking at abrupt shifts in mood. We're looking at difficulty being able to regulate feeling. So the response to a situation is often, if the situation is a 3, the response is an 8 on a 0 to 10 continuum. So the responses are over the top. They're often very difficult or hard for that young person to control. They report feeling very overwhelmed, and having a lot of difficulty coping with stressful situations. We see this a lot in young people who have experienced trauma, because when we think about trauma, we think about the fact that it's an experience that falls outside the boundaries of typical life. Now, typical life, in puffy air quotes, changes, right? Our typical life in my generation growing up looks very different than the typical life of my daughters, and the typical life maybe of Susie's children, because they're older than mine. So it changes based on what's going on in society, what's going on in the world. But the one thing that stays the same in traumatic experience is that sense of having the ground pulled out from underneath you, that sense that the world is very, very different today than it was yesterday, that it's somehow unsafe. And of course, I'm getting a phone call right in the middle. That somehow the world is unsafe. And so often what happens in the expression of emotional dysregulation is that a young person is trying to make sense of a situation that doesn't make sense, and things feel threatening. Things feel very real to them in a way that the adults in their life who are coming from a different perspective may not understand. And so often for us, it feels, we want to help them. At first, first emotions are leaning in and trying to help and wanting to be there and trying to make it better, because that's what parents do, right? That's our job. We're supposed to protect our children and keep them safe and help them to grow. And so we lean into that, and we try and rescue them from that situation, or from that experience. And what we can kind of run into is that, after a while, especially when a young person is really struggling with this over the course of time, our feelings can change. And it's okay to get angry. It's okay to feel resentful or frustrated, or like you want to bang your head against the wall sometimes, when there's an emotional disruption again, and it's very hard to self-soothe. Maybe you're out in public, having those normal frustrated feelings, is it's okay. It's what you do with the feelings that matters. Right? It's where you share them and how you share them in a more appropriate way, that matters, that makes a difference. Um, so let's to the next. Let's talk about what we do, right? When we have a young person who struggles with emotional dysregulation, there are some really important ways that we can help them to re-regulate immediately. So in the face, and again, I'm speaking about emotional dysregulation that comes in the face of, or in the aftermath of trauma. There's lots of different types of emotional dysregulation. It's found in a lot of different ways in young people. Certainly, it's possible for young people who've never experienced trauma to be emotionally dysregulated, sometimes a moderate amount of time, or a lot of the time. But really, what we're targeting here tonight is emotional dysregulation in the face of traumatic events. So returning to a structure, creating safety, that is, it comes in the form of routine and order, not rigid order, but order that that provides some predictability. The same way we get up and, what's your ritual in the morning? For me, I get up, I come out, I pour my coffee, I scroll my news feed to see what's happened since I went to bed, and that's kind of something that I typically do every day. For your children, obviously, those things are different. They're getting up, maybe getting ready for school. So when a young person experiences a traumatic event, a singular one, or has one that occurs kind of more chronically and over time, creating and providing a return to structure and routine and normalcy helps them to feel grounded, helps them to feel safe again in their own environment, even though their life has been disrupted. Really helping a young person to notice what has happened. This one is really important. Helping them to notice and understand what they're thinking and feeling. It's easy to say that. It's a little bit more tricky to do that. Um, when we're talking about emotional dysregulation, often it's very disruptive and it's very emotional, for you and for your child. And after it's all over, there's often exhaustion and feelings of frustration, feelings of overwhelm, not, a desire to kind of move on and not necessarily talk about it or process it. But actually, the kindest thing that we can do for our kids and for ourselves is to take a point when things have calmed down to self-reflect. And children don't naturally self-reflect. We have to teach them how to do it, just like emotional regulation. We have the capacity for it, but it's a learned skill, which means that as a parent or caregiver, you have an opportunity here, in the aftermath of emotional dysregulation and what you notice as patterns, to be able to talk to your young person about what they noticed about the situation. What happened for you? Asking an open-ended question here is really important. And how you say what you say here matters. It matters all the time, but it especially matters here. So some suggestions for you, easy openers are, hey, I notice, or I'm concerned about you. And having little, what's the word I'm looking for? Little pieces of kind of pre-structured sentences. So almost like scripting can really be helpful to us as caregivers to know how to begin. Because sometimes when things are hitting the fan and it's really hard and we're in the aftermath of something like that, it's hard to know what to say. It's hard to know how to start that conversation. So, hey, I'm concerned, or hey, I noticed that you really struggled today when we were in the mall and it was really loud and there were a lot of people. I wonder if we can sit down and maybe chat about that a little bit. Let's talk about it. Um, and again, for some young people, sitting down to have a one-on-one eye-to-eye conversation can be really difficult. So be creative. Maybe go out and play some basketball and talk about it, or take a walk. Here in Florida, it's too hot to walk during the day, but taking a walk in the evening, or riding in the car talking about it, where that eye contact is disrupted, can make it a lot easier for a young person to be able to talk about, what happened for them there. So you're going to go through that, and you're going to ask more open-ended questions. Once you kind of get them talking and find out a little bit more about what was happening for them, ask them open-ended questions like, what worked there? What didn't work? What could you have done differently in that? So maybe they can reflect a little bit and say, well, maybe I could have stepped away, or I could have come and gotten you and let you know that I was feeling this way, and that we could have left them all sooner, right? And so that's a way for a young person to kind of solve the problem a little bit independently with your support. And that helps to build their own reservoir of being able to problem solve and self-reflect, and it's the beginnings of self-regulation. Does that making sense, that flow? Good. I can only see Susie and she's nodding, so I think I'm okay. um, Another important thing to notice here when we're kind of having those post episode or post emotional dysregulation difficulty conversations is to keep yourself out of it. Now, we always want to, as parents, as caregivers, we want to bring in our wisdom. We really want to impart, like, hey, this happened to me. And while that's wonderful to do that, in this moment, it may not be the most appropriate thing. I get one admitted here. It may not be the best thing, right? And I say that not because we don't want you talking about those things with your kids. We don't want you to, we're saying don't tell them about your experience, but place it properly. Placing it properly means a lot. When a young person is coming to you, and again, I'm speaking right now, we're kind of in that latency age and on into teenage years. We're kind of talking about that age group right now because they're a little bit more verbal and have a little bit more self-reflection skills. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about doing this with younger kids. But thinking about keeping yourself out of it and asking them about their experience, and then using silence. Be quiet and just listen. We often, we want to go in when we see our kids hurting and we want to help them. And sometimes our silence and our listening ear, and listening without judgment, so not attempting to correct language if they curse right away, not attempting to redirect them or tell them that this is good and this is bad, but just listening. There's time for all of those other parental guiding comments, but maybe not here. Let them share with you, let them get it all out. And then when it's all laid out, you can look at what pieces you're gonna suggest that they pick back up. Like, you did this really well. You did this really well too. This didn't look like it worked out so well. So if you notice what I'm doing here, and when we get to the next slide, we're going to talk more about it. What we're kind of doing is coming above the situation and trying to lay it out and look at it from a little slightly more objective space. That's going to be really important for them And also for you, as we get to talking about the next piece,
If I can interject, one thing I found incredibly helpful too is to not try to fix. And it took me a while to learn that. But they say my son said, I'm really sad, or I hate my brother, rather than saying, oh, but you have all these things to be happy about, or let's go get ice cream to make you feel better, or you shouldn't hate your brother. I learned to just say, it can suck to be sad, or why do you feel like you hate your brother? Because trying to fix it does not make the feeling go away. It's still there. So might as well let them have the feeling. I mean, imagine if you're sad and somebody says to you, I'm going to get you an ice cream to fix it. That might be nice, but it won't fix it. You'd rather be heard, and it to be heard is huge. That's
awesome. That's exactly right. And you bring up a great point, Susie, that you know, you know, you can't fix it, right? And the other dynamic that gets created when you do that, when you say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, or oh, here, have an ice cream, or it's not okay to hate your brother, is that for a young person, that might be a brick in the wall that they can put up and identify you as a person that's not safe, right? Even though you love them and care for them and you want the best for them, if they don't feel safe being able to share the kind of good and bad and ugly, then they're going to not necessarily tell you the things that you can be helpful with. So being aware of that, and I guess I should say here, since we're kind of on this topic anyway, it may not be you. How about that for a bummer, right? I'm thinking I'm mom of the century. I'm a therapist, for goodness sakes. It should, of course, be me. But you know what? It may not be, right? For my daughter, it was, but for my other daughter, not so much. She prefers, when she needs to share, she prefers to talk to my husband than to talk to me. And that's something that can be really hard when you are the caregiver who's definitely works more with the emotional side of your children's development. Um, but it happens, and it's okay. You have to deal with that within yourself, but it's okay that it's not you, as long as it's somebody who's safe. Like I said, Miss Buck, she was amazing for me. She's not a family member of mine. She was my second grade teacher, but she was that person for me in that point in my life. I've been lucky enough to have a few, they've all been women as I'm thinking about it, right? A few women in my life as I grew up that were really instrumental in that way, in providing that non-judgmental listening ear with support, who were able to just be there for me and hear me and not fix it necessarily, because it wasn't their role to do that. So back, because I got off on a little bit of a tangent. I'm sorry. I love this stuff. I'm a big mental health nerd. So it's really, I kind of head down the road. So bringing us back to where we are, meeting your child where they are. We've kind of talked about that already. Using age appropriate language and speaking the truth. This is important, especially in situations where, like, I'm thinking about mass traumatic events like hurricanes. I live in Florida, so that's where I naturally go. Or man-made situations like Susie and I come together after the Sandy Hook school shootings, right? So looking at that situation and that scenario, just to give you an example, the age appropriate truth will be different based on the developmental level of your child. But what we saw coming out of there is that outcomes for kids who were not given any information after the fact of what happened in an age appropriate way with age appropriate language had a lot more severe symptoms for a lot longer, right? Because if your child has gone through something, they know that they've gone through something. And again, it kind of goes back to the idea of making it so that they can't talk to you. If you're not able to share in an age appropriate way some truth about the situation. So yes, a bad person did come into the school. And yes, there are people, yes, there are people who passed away because of that. that's an age appropriate thing to say for a younger child. It gives information, but it doesn't give all the information. There's not details, but it gives enough information to validate the truth of their experience, at the same time keeping it in couched in a way that they can understand, that's simple, that is also then can be reinforced with all of the other safety measures that are around them, if that, if that makes sense. The last point here under healthy engagement really talks about um, how to practice with your young person to help them to take the skills that they've learned about self-reflection and emotional regulation and put them into practice. And so I think of a trip to the mall. There are times when you hear that child who is really struggling with some emotional dysregulation in a public place, and that can often be really hard with a lot of mix of emotions. So let's say you're the parent or caregiver of that young person, and you've done some work, and in the next slide we're going to talk about that work a little more deeply, but you've done some work with them, they've been in counseling. There's opportunity to go back into places in a very, it's called exposure therapy in my language, but there's opportunity for you as the parent to take a young person back into a in a very controlled way into a triggering situation, and to reprocess that situation with a better outcome. So that's kind of a higher level skill that we'll talk about as we move through. So let's look a little bit about what we really can do practically as a parent. And let me see where we are in time. We're doing pretty well. Um, so this slide is really about our role as parent or caregiver with a young person who experiences emotional dysregulation, and how to manage that from the parent's point of view. So we've done a lot of like, okay, you can say this, you can do this, create this opportunity, but there's more work on the backside. When we're looking at our son or daughter, and we are concerned that they're struggling with emotional dysregulation, it's getting in the way of their life, right? Because of the nature of emotional dysregulation, it is life disrupting, because it does come with all of the sights and sounds and tears and difficulty. So what I would challenge you to do as a parent is really get to understand the signs and symptoms for your young person, right? It could be your niece or your nephew, it could be, your own child. But when I'm working with parents who come to me and they're struggling with their children in this way, I'll often suggest to them, get a notebook. Get a notebook, put it in your phone, find some way to begin to track for yourself in kind of again, going back to that 3,000-foot view. You can't really be objective because they're your kid, but as objectively as you can in the situation, look at all of the components of what's happening. So think about what's happening prior to the, period of emotional dysregulation. What happened before? Were they hungry? Did they had enough sleep last night? Are they fighting with someone? Right? Did something happen at school? Look for those precursor events. Look for that triggering moment. Then understanding kind of what happens when they're in the midst of one of these episodes. That can be really important, right? What's their emotional expression like? Is it anger? Is it tears? Is it a mix? What are they talking about? If they're yelling, what are they yelling about? Because those things can give you not only information that you can use, but also information that you can then bring to your child's therapist. Because, we talked about this a little in the beginning, and maybe I didn't say this right then, and I probably should have, but all of the research that I have ever seen on trauma recovery and resilience building notes that that recovery is absolutely possible, and early intervention makes for the best possible outcome with the least amount of residual impact as your child develops. So that means, finding the right therapist is super important. And we'll talk about that in just a minute because there's a lot of things that you can do to do that. But as is going back and staying on the understanding signs and symptoms, understand look and try and catalog after the fact what happened there. What was the antecedent or the precursor? What were the trigger points? What happened within the context of it? And what did it look like after it was over? Because understanding that from a slightly more removed view allows you as the parent or caregiver to know when to intervene, to know when is the best possible time to knock on the door and come inside, or to invite them out for a snack and a talk, or a walk and a talk, or baseball or football or basketball or something that allows for that conversation to naturally develop. Um, it also, like I said, gives you information that you can bring to the clinician that you choose in order to help, get them the help that they need. The next point here in actually understanding our role and how we influence healing and change is looking at grounding and breathing and movement, right? Looking at skills. And when we talk about skills, they're not just skills that we're going to learn and teach our children, they're skills that we're going to use ourselves. And when we get to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But understanding that developmentally, children can learn grounding skills, self-regulation skills, they can learn breathing, um, which all helps us to re-regulate not only our cognitions, our thoughts, our emotions, but also our physical bodies, because we're one being. And so when we experience a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, all of our systems can be impacted. Another anecdotal here, in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook school shootings, I had the opportunity to work on a grant. My first grant was the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I was co-located in a pediatric office. And what we were able to see, there's not too many pediatric offices in our little town, but what we were able to see and data that we were able to collect is that children who were, from about 6 years old to about 11 years old were reporting a lot of somatic symptoms, right? Stomach aches, headaches. Mommy, I don't want to go to school because my stomach hurts or my head hurts, right? So because developmentally, maybe there's not the language to say, I'm worried, I'm anxious, I'm afraid, I don't want to return to school. I don't want to go out and be with my friends. They may not have that ability to communicate that. So it comes out in the body. So when we talk about skill development for young people and for ourselves, we're talking about skills that help us to re-regulate. So grounding skills, breathing skills. I'm sure that most of you on this webinar know how to breathe in the box or breathe on the 4 count, or how to re-regulate your breathing. And if we were a smaller group, my original plan when we started this was that we would all breathe together, but we're so big that we probably can't do that tonight. But so if you, and you can easily do this yourself by just doing a quick Google search, the information is out there, it's all free. I would suggest, take a minute after we're done tonight and go look for, breathing on the 4 count or breathing in the box. It's a simple square breath exercise. And then what you can do with that, if you practice it and you master it, doing it a couple of times a day, not necessarily when you're under stress, but doing it a couple of times a day, and you begin to notice the positive outcomes from that, you can teach that to your child. If your child is little, you might want to teach it differently. When we were working with young people after Sandy Hook, one of the things that instead of, breathe in on 1, hold 2, breathe out 3, hold 4, we did, smell the flowers and blow out the candles, right? Smell the roses. Okay, blow out the candles. It's the same exercise, different language, totally teachable. You don't need a therapist necessarily to do that. You can teach your child on your own, on their own, on your own, how to do that and make that part of the family, part of what your family does.
Somebody
For
just commented in the chat that they do breath work with bubbles, and bubbles can be a great tool as well.
Absolutely. Bubbles are a great tool. And thank you for saying that, because I remember I'm thinking of Hannah's first therapist that they did bubble breath work. And that's great. And it's fun, right? And kids are more apt to do something when it's fun, right?
A
If it's
reminder here, if anyone has any questions, to put them in the chat.
Is nobody giving us questions?
Um, got a couple.
Okay. All right. So let's think about your role as your child's advocate, right? Getting them um, into see someone is wonderful, and it's appropriate, and it's helpful, and it's healthy if the symptoms that your child is experiencing are disrupting their lives. When we talk about, as a therapist, when I talk to somebody about diagnosable mental illnesses or diagnosable mental health challenges, I'm looking at a number of different variables. I'm looking at the length of time something has been going on, a symptom has been occurring. I'm looking at the intensity of that symptom, right? How intense that person perceives it to be. And I am looking at how life interrupting it is. So if you experience, if your child's either coming to you and telling you that they want to see someone, listen and do that. But if they're not able to tell you developmentally, but you're really noticing that life around the house, life in school, because of the symptoms that they're experiencing is very disrupted, that might be a time to really turn the gas up to help them find or help yourself find the right therapist for them. You're looking for a therapist who is a trauma therapist, who is well versed and has expertise in your child's age group, right? I'm a therapist, but I don't work with young children. That's not my wheelhouse. So you want to make sure that you find somebody who is in there, whose expertise is in their wheelhouse, whose interventions that they talk about or the types of therapy that they provide focus in on trauma recovery. And there's lots of different ones. You can do some online research about that, but certainly thinking about EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. That's a great intervention platform to use with adolescents and young adults. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, that runs the gambit of childhood. So you want to look for somebody with the right expertise, the right age groups. You can find therapists in a lot of different ways. I suggest, and when, in the nonprofit that I work in, we use a lot of different research tools, but Psychology Today is a great one. You can go in and you can select for the type of therapist that you're looking for, male, female, area of expertise, types of insurance that they take. So it's a good place to start. Also, you can look on the back, if you have insurance, you can look on the back of your insurance card and call up your insurance company, whom you pay good money to provide you with insurance, and ask them, let them work for you to pick out a small grouping of therapists, but then you're still going to have to call. The best therapist for your child is the person that they connect with and relate to. And that can take a little time. So if you go to one or even go to two and it doesn't gel, don't give up. Don't give up. Keep trying until you find that right person. The last point on this slide is about creating a team around your child. And that sounds kind of strange. What does that mean? And the kind of analogy I give here is, imagine a bicycle wheel. And your child is the hub of the wheel in the center. And all of the spokes that come out of that center wheel should be people who are positive, healthy supports for your young person. They don't all have to be therapists, although a therapist might have, will have one of the spokes on the wheel. Your child's pediatrician or their family doctor might be another person to have kind of as part of the team of people that is looking out for your child, that's also aware of what your child is experiencing. If you're a person of faith, having your faith leader understand not everything, you get to share what you want to share, how much or how little, but having that person involved. It could be aunts or uncles, grandparents, neighbors, teachers, coaches, even all the way down to the lunch lady at school. The positive social supports, if they're healthy, if they are well boundaried, and they have the best interest of your child in mind, you can create a hub, you can create the wheel around your child with anybody that that you and they feel like are helpful. There's no one right way. Mine's going to look different than Susie's, and it's going to look different than Katie's on here. But they're all important. So think about creating something like that for thinking about who those people might be in your child's life. We're almost done. So a little bit about us. When you love somebody who struggles with emotional dysregulation, it can be really hard. It can be really hard, right? There are good days and bad days and days where it's very frustrating. And also there can be emotional activation that occurs for us, right? And that's what I'm talking about here in this first part, where we talk about when somebody else is struggling with big feelings, it can be activating for us. It can activate in our brains our own our own distress system. And so that's where I talk about that there kind of brain activation. When we have that happen, when that happens for us, it's very important that we step back and take care of ourselves. Not that we need to leave the situation, but we need to recognize for ourselves that something different is happening. Right? We can recognize this often by, I say this again in a lot of therapeutic, when you don't know how you're feeling or you can't figure out what your thoughts are doing in a situation, go back to your body. What's your body doing? Are you sweaty? Is your heart pounding or beating really fast? Is your stomach upset? Do you have a bit of a headache? Do you feel like you can't swallow properly? That's your body telling you a whole bunch of information, right? That your systems are activating before you even necessarily know your systems are activated. So go back to yourself and think about what happens for you. Think about keeping a journal during all of this. Think about finding your own therapist in the context of this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. What happens when everything that we try doesn't work? There are times when the things that we try at home, going to therapy, when we're in a crisis situation. When you hit a situation that's a crisis, it's hard as a parent to kind of make that decision that you need more help. But it's important that you understand that there may be times that you do, times where a call to a crisis line like 988, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that's in 150 different languages, runs 24/7, and is not just for people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. Right? It is staffed with trained crisis interventionists who can help you and can help your child in your language of choice. It's a great first step when things are really not calming, not working well. It may also be that a trip to the emergency room is in order at times, and that can be really difficult too, to make that decision to know when. I suggest more often than not to err on the side of caution. If the situation is out of control and your loved one is at risk of bodily harm to you or someone else, you need to call the authorities. Whether some states we have mobile crisis teams, some states do not. In Florida, we do have some small, we have mobile crisis spotty, but most often we have to call 911, which is not great. It's not a good system, but it's the system that we have, and so we utilize that when we have to. So don't be afraid to get the help that you need. Let your young person be mad at you for a little while, but let them be here. Make sense?
And if I might interject, one of the best things we did during high school when a lot of the trauma symptoms were emerging in my son, it was suggested to us, you know, to get a parent coach for my husband and I. And my first reaction was, no, I need to focus on my son and I don't need a coach. I am a coach and then I do this. And it took a little while, but that was one of the best things we ever did. Because once we started working on ourselves, we actually saw some improvement. You know, not major, it's not magic, but definitely some improvement because our son saw us tending to ourselves and didn't even need to see it directly, could feel it because the energy of the interactions shifted just slightly, and that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and that you bring, that was perfectly placed, Susie, because that brings us right to the next piece, right? It's taking care of you. Um, when we talk about universal precautions, I'm sure that most of you on this webinar have flown on a plane, and when the flight attendant comes around and stands in the middle and talks about the oxygen mask, that you must put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help anybody else. So like Susie's talking about with the parent coach, they sought out support and help for themselves, and learning the techniques that they learned from the parenting coach, they were able to make subtle and maybe not so subtle shifts and respond differently because they were taking better care of themselves. That old, and I get it a lot. I can't care for myself right now, or I don't have good self-care because I'm so worried about my son or daughter. It's okay. I'm just going to say it's bupkis. Um, be mad at me if you want, that's okay. But you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't get a bucket of water from an empty well. You can't take care of your young person in the way that they need to the best of your ability if you're not taking care of yourself. So self-assessment and self-care planning, again, these are tools that you can find on the internet. Susie and I can also supply them to you if you would like. You could put something in the chat if you want to get a copy of stuff. These slides are going to be available after the webinar is over as well for you, so you'll be able to have all of this. So we can send stuff out then as well. But doing your own self-care assessment, look at the domains of your own mental well-being, right? Your own overall well-being. Are you tending to those domains? Are you giving back to the world? Are you exercising? Are you eating right? Are you taking care of your body? Are you taking care of your spiritual life, your financial life, your intellectual life, your work life? Right? Because often as parents, we get so busy, we stop growing as human beings. And that can be really difficult. So making sure that you're looking at not only where the strengths are, but where the holes are, and making a step to fill in one or two of those holes. Right. Then let's see, what else do we need to cover here? I think we did that. And we did that. And in the interest of making sure that there's time for questions, I think we're going to go over to research and community resources and get to the last slide. The other thing that I recommend is, just do a Google search on, resources in your community. What we've put up here in this slide, these are all national resources. These are places where you guys can go and learn, right? The more that you can observe and understand what's happening for your young person, and then the more you can do research, come to things like this, right? This is why, this is part of the reason that this is happening tonight, is that, both Susie and I, and I'll speak for you for a sec, Susie, is, we felt compelled. It's part of our life mission to be able to pass on not only the wisdom and understanding, that's great, but the connectedness and letting us all know that we're not alone in the struggles that we have, and we're not alone on the walk, whether we are ourselves, recovering from traumatic experience, or we're caring for our children who are recovering from traumatic experience. We're not alone. There's lots of resources. We do this together. And Susie, it looks like you want to share some stuff, so I'm going to stop talking now.
Well, we do have a couple questions that I want to make sure we get to in the interest of time.
Okay.
A couple are similar. They really have to do with our inability to control or manage our child's situation when they're not with us. One person said some family members on their team are not emotionally healthy, and watching other families be too emotional with the child, she referred to it as being like throwing gas on a fire. And another attendee said they feel helpless in other situations while the child is okay at home. Daycare, church, she has trouble regulating her emotions, and they're not there to help her.
Okay. Um, so those are great questions. And yeah, that's a difficulty, especially when, you know, if it's a two household like co-parenting system, or, you know, your child spends time with a grandparent or a parent. So, you know, there's two responses to that first person's share. One, you know, I would suggest going back again and trying to have a conversation about the concerns that you see, about ways that they can be helpful. You might suggest to them, if they're open to it, there's something called mental health first aid, which is a training program in mental health and well-being strategies for adults who work with or interact with young people. And that can be a great place for people to pick up skills and to understand. Now, if that person can't understand them, then I would suggest that if there's any way in that you can to limit the amount of contact, the amount of time that that young person spends in the company of that emotionally dysregulated adult, that would be optimal. Sometimes we know that that's just not possible, in which case you're going to be doing that repair work until you can figure out a different situation. Speaking to the second part of that same comment that talks about daycare and church, my suggestion here is learn more, you know, kind of if you have the information already, if you understand what your child goes through, then I would go to the director of, you know, if it's faith formation, or Sunday school, go to the directors there, go to the director of the daycare center and sit them down and have a talk. You can regulate how much information about the experience you share, like the details, but you can also be a little bit more directive in saying, this is what I need from you for my son or daughter. This is what they're experiencing. This is what they're going through. This is what we're doing at home. So I need, you know, I know that my child is only one of many children. However, if we can, you know, if there, you know, there is a way to do this for them, that's what I need to have happen. Not perfect, but communicating effectively about what your child needs helps you to build a more functional team or make the changes necessary to build a better team.
So we have time for one more question, if people don't mind going a minute or two past 8, and also this will be recorded for anyone who has to leave or misses it. But somebody's wondering, how can they know that the language they use is appropriate for a 12-year-old? There's some caregivers for her child that she worries are using inappropriate language. So how does she know the language is appropriate? And also someone asked if we can put the list of resources in the chat. I don't know if you're able to do that, but if so.
I can try. Absolutely, I can try to do that. So you guys are going to have to bear with me. Anybody that needs to drop off, absolutely drop off. But I'm kind of a not very technically savvy. So how can we ensure that people other than kind of the main folks in this young person's life are using age appropriate language with them?
And even the main person, how
Okay.
can she be sure that the language she uses is appropriate for a 12-year-old?
That's a great question. My best suggestion, you know, 12-year-olds now are very different than the 12-year-old you were and the 12-year-old I was, because we didn't have as much technology, right? We didn't have access to so many things, right? Social media and, you know, TikTok and Google and Insta and all of that mess. So it really changes developmentally. A 12-year-old now is much more anxious, probably in part because of that. Feels the world is generally less safe because of that. Um, um, oh, thank you, Paul. Where's Paul? Paul put up a, oh, thank you. I will look at that in a second, but my best suggestion here is, you know your child best. And when you're using age appropriate language, it is, it gives enough truth so that your young person understands what's happening. Certainly it doesn't use foul language or threatening language. It keeps the vocabulary akin to what a 12 or 13-year-old would understand. So keeping your sentences shorter, keeping your words, instead of using, SAT words, use words that are a little bit easier to understand, and then ask them what they heard you say. And you can assess that way really quickly if they understand what it is that you're trying to say and what it is that the meaning is behind that. I know that's a little bit vague. The other thing that you can do is do a simple Google search on, how do I talk to my child about, actually, this is scary but wonderful. You can use chat, you can use AI and type that into AI, and AI will tell you the magical answer. It's creepy and a little bit disconcerting, but it can give you some good places to jump off from.
And there's an organization called the Child Mind Institute, childmind.org, that even if you Google that question and child mind, something similar will come up. They have so many blogs and articles with these kinds of issues, and I use them a lot.
And actually, Child Mind is on our resource list.
Good.
So I'm gonna put this back up and see. Wait, I gotta look at Paul's
And
comment.
before we lose people, I just want to tell you that we're going to be having another free webinar on August 7th, which is a Wednesday evening, I believe, at the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, which is about caring for yourself while caring for a young person who has experienced trauma. So we'll get more into, self-care and some very helpful tools I've learned through the years that I actually wish I had at the time, but happy to pass on to others. We'll have more time for questions then, and we'll also give information on the opportunities that we're going to be offering down the road for coaching. And again, this has been recorded, so we will be posting this on the Trauma Informed Parent YouTube page and the Facebook page. So everything that happened here tonight will be available for you to rewatch or share with others.
Yes, and you'll get all of those. You'll get all the resources in the materials that we send out. I want to thank you guys for hanging there with us. I hope that you got something that you can take away and learn tonight, use tonight rather. And I hope that you come back, because we're going to take a deep dive into you guys and taking how do we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of them. And Susie and I, as she mentioned, we're taking a foray into doing some one-on-one work and intensive. So we hope that if you get something out of these, that you'll be interested in maybe learning more about that. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night.
Thanks for joining. Have a wonderful evening.